What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode here, the Desai Guys Football Forum. I'm one of your co-hosts, I'm Desai, joined as always by my good friend, my good buddy, the Desai Guys, Mr. Tad Desai. And Tad, we're continuing our series here of Fantasy Football 101. We did our last episode, talking about, just how to get into fantasy football, because we sort of discussed this where it's like, we do a fantasy football podcast. If we tell anybody that we're doing a fantasy football podcast, some people may check out. That's like, all right, that's not for me. But like we talked about as well, just it's a growing popular, it's very popular, hobby out there. When football season comes around, it's a very standard question you probably get asked in your work setting or personal setting as well. That's like, oh, I have a fantasy football league. Are you interested in joining? And it's like, I have no idea how to get into fantasy football. I have no idea what that is. That is the whole purpose of these two episodes and this series, is to like sort of get all those people that are interested in fantasy football but just don't know how to get into it. That is what we're doing for you here.
100%. And, we're going to be diving into a lot of, what's coming up in just a couple of weeks for a lot of leagues. In fact, my league just set our draft date last weekend, actually. And it's really exciting because, for long-time listeners and viewers, we are also the, draft podcast kind of home base for LAFB Network. And people ask me all the time, they go, why do you love the draft so much? It's a little weird how much you love that one event. And it's because of the hope. It's the S on the chest for, football fans of like on draft day, anybody can be the champion. You might have just drafted your future, franchise quarterback. It's the same thing with fantasy football drafts. This is my year. I'm not going to have to fulfill punishments, which we will also talk about, by the way. So yes, that first episode, I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I'm actually more excited for the second episode because this is when we get into the good stuff.
Yeah, so like Tad talked about, we're going to talk about the fantasy draft, what happens when you're actually in season, and the potential things you may have to worry about once the season is over. But in case you missed our last episode, we literally went into like how to join a league, what sort of minimum, maximum roster settings you need, all that stuff. Go check out that episode, and then definitely obviously check out this episode here as we go further, pick up where we left off in that last episode. But one thing we definitely have to do is give a great shout out to our sponsors at Underdog Fantasy, because they remain a fantastic sponsor of ours. Great way to get into fantasy football. We talked about different fantasy leagues. They do a great setting called Best Ball, where literally you just draft a roster. You don't have to worry about making waiver claims, any changes during the season, no trades, no nothing. You draft a roster, you set it, and you forget it. It always gives you the maximum scoring potential in each and every week, so you don't have to worry about any sort of players scoring for you that are on your bench as opposed to in your starting roster. It's a very easy way to get into fantasy football, so I would recommend that if you're a first timer for fantasy football. Best Ball is a very good option for you, where you can sort of just, get into it, draft a roster, and you're ready to go. Don't have to make any changes during the season. But the thing that me and Tad love Underdog Fantasy for is the betting aspect, where it's like you can bet on any sport that you're comfortable with, whether that's the upcoming NFL season, upcoming college football season. You could bet on the WNBA season, what's left of it. They took a brief pause here during the Olympics. You could bet on the Olympics as well. You got the MLB season going on right now. So whatever you're comfortable betting with, you can bet with Underdog Fantasy. All you have to do is make anywhere between 2 and 8 different prop bet picks. The more potential picks you make, the more potential money you can win. So it's just a really great way to bet on what you're comfortable with and win yourself some good money. And Underdog Fantasy has shared with us a promo code that we're going to share with you. That promo code is DESAI, DESAI. You could double up on your initial deposit of $10 or more, up to $500, courtesy of your good friends at Underdog Fantasy. So if you were to put in that $500 on your first deposit, only the first one, not multiple deposits, and use our promo code DESAI, DESAI, you can match that dollar for dollar, and Underdog Fantasy will give you up to $1,000 on their betting platform. You can use the website, you can use the mobile apps, both on Android and Apple. Very user-friendly on both applications, both on the mobile devices as well as the website. So get into the fun. It's a ton of fun. It's very user-friendly, like I said, very easy to use. And yeah, bet on what you're comfortable with. That promo code, once again, is DESAI, DESAI. Double up on your initial deposit of $10 or more, up to $500. So Tad, we're literally going to pick up where we left off. And it's like we ended where it's like, what do you do while you're waiting for your draft? Well, here, now you're getting closer to draft day or you're still waiting for your draft day. It's like, this is the biggest thing that I can't stress. If you're a first timer in fantasy football, start doing research. So, I mean, it's like, we're a great fantasy platform for you. You that has subscribed your videos and you get all fantasy information from us. But I mean, like I said, it's a very popular hobby. So there are tons of publications out there. We appreciate if you only tune into us, but I mean, we won't blame you if you decide to go check out other people, because there's a lot of great information out there, both through articles as well as other podcasts, as well as YouTube videos. I mean, what have you. You can find great information to make sure you're the most prepared before you get to your fantasy draft. And I mean, if you're doing research and you're reading some articles or you hear something that you may be like, I never heard that term before, be a Tad want to go over some, so like some vocabulary that you may come across, some terms, some acronyms maybe that you may not be as familiar with as you're getting into fantasy football. So the first one I'm going to pass here to you, Tad, ADP. What does ADP stand for?
ADP stands for average draft position. So essentially what most of these sites will do, and then if you're like, what sites? Go back and listen to episode 1, because we also break down some of the top sites to use, including not Underdog.
Underdog's one of them.
Underdog is one of them, but that's more of a daily or a weekly type thing. Sleeper is what I was thinking of. Sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo's, NFL.com. All these sites, what they do is they collectively gather data, but in a less nefarious way than like Google. And what they do is they'll see, let's say Patrick Mahomes is being drafted on average around the 6th overall pick. And they will relay that information back at you. They'll say usually around mid to late August, it becomes fairly standard. If you try to look at it in July, that's a little risky, because that's not, I mean, we're getting too into the weeds here, but like that's smaller data set versus larger data set.
Exactly.
But point being is it helps you plan of like, okay, this is like the spot in the draft where this guy is most likely to go. So if you really like Patrick Mahomes and you're picking at 4, and he's probably not going to be there. This is too much math for me. He's probably not going to be there when I pick 20th in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
Did I do that right?
I think so.
Oh my God, that's an upset. Point being is it helps you kind of plan of like, if you need to reach for a guy, and reach means kind of draft him at a point where it's a little bit more valuable than you should. This is a point to reach for him. So ADP basically means this is likely where he's going to get drafted. It works better for snake drafts and auction drafts. ADP doesn't really translate well to auction drafts. But in general, it gives you a good idea of how your draft is going to shake out before it actually begins.
I agree with that. So, Tad, if I were to tell you about a boomer bust player, what's a boomer bust type of player?
Oh, my dude. My dude is a boomer bust player. This is a guy that is either going to win you the league or he is going to be the reason that you absolutely bomb. And I will tell you, you know what? Let's use my actual boomer bust player. I shouldn't say the boomer bust player, but he's definitely on the list whenever we do that episode. Aaron Rodgers. Let's use him as an example. So, and I'll switch it from, snake to auction draft, right? Aaron Rodgers is surrounded by a very talented offense with Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, pretty good offensive line if they can stay healthy. He is coming off an injury though. So he is either going to have an amazing comeback season at, I believe, 41 years old.
Yeah.
Is it 40 or 41?
I think it's 41.
41. So I think he's either going to have an amazing season or he's going to get hurt again and his career is going to be done. So in terms of an auction draft, you are more than welcome to. Most good quarterbacks tend to go around, $10 to $20 in that range. Yeah, you can pay that $18 for him, and it's either going to look like a genius move by the end of the season, or that is going to be your biggest regret of the entire season. That is boomer bust. It is a giant risk to take, but if it pays off big. Think of it like if for gamblers who are getting into fantasy football, think of it like instead of going red or black in roulette, you're going with a number.
Yeah, I can very much liken it to that for sure. Tad, if I was to ask you, what is a handcuff player? Do you know what that is?
Handcuff player, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is basically just like a safe player, right? Like a guy you can always depend on. That's my understanding of it.
No, a handcuff in this situation is like, let's say, this is a perfect example. Cleveland Browns, for their running back situation, they currently have Jerome Ford as their starter. But in previous cases, because Nick Chubb is currently injured right now, a handcuff situation is that, once Nick Chubb is healthy, Jerome Ford becomes your handcuff player, because if Nick Chubb were to get hurt again, then you want that insurance of like, a handcuff guy that's like both these guys are tied together, because that's how your backfield works. Another good example is the Los Angeles Rams with both Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. Whereas if Kyron Williams gets hurt, you want to have Blake Corum on your roster, because you know that guy is going to take a lot of those carries in that offense. So that's the definition of a handcuff player.
Okay, that explains why I did not know that strategy. I think that's a dumb strategy. Because you're keeping, and we'll talk more about this in terms of like, draft strategy, but keeping a bench spot is, and we talked about this on the last episode, where bench spots are very valuable. That was, and I'll repeat what I said last time, where that was honestly the biggest debate my league has ever had, is do we shrink the bench? And that was also my first year as commissioner, nightmare scenario. But I think using a bench for essentially like either it essentially is insurance. And like American insurance, it's a giant scam, because it's something, a super valuable bench spot that you're just using on a wish and a prayer. And I think, and we'll definitely get into this, you can find a better waiver player that will be more valuable to your team. So I don't believe in the handcuff theory, but clearly some do if it's in the glossary.
Yeah. And some also use that strategy where it's like if somebody else drafted a starting player, but they have injury potential, they draft a handcuff.
See, that's different. That's different. If you're handcuffing another team, maybe, but even then, it's just, I don't know. It depends on the player. Like if you're drafting, how about this for some throwback names? If you're drafting Harry Douglas, because you know that Julio Jones is going to miss at least 6 weeks of the year, that's a safe bet. But if you're like, I think, Nick Chubb, I almost said Bradley Chubb. I think Nick Chubb is going to tear his ACL again. I don't think that's a good bet to make.
Fair. That's fair. One of the big things here that I think a lot of people do, whether they have experience or whether they don't have experience with fantasy football, is mock drafting. So Tad, explain what a mock draft is.
Okay, so mock draft is basically exactly what it sounds like. So you go into, and there's a great episode of the league about this I'll break down, but ESPN's really good about this. You go in, you join a league, let me put that quotes, join a league. By the way, I just taught my students what this means today. They're like, oh, we thought it was bunny ears.
Air quotes, in case you're listening to us, Tad did air quotes.
Yes, air quotes. And they're like, we thought those were bunny ears. Like, oh, God. But you join a league with air quotes and you draft like normal. You can choose whether it's auction, mock, or otherwise. And you get to look at your roster afterwards. And then after, I believe, an hour or so, league gets deleted. You never play a single game in that league. It's basically to test out ADP. In my mind, is basically how real is this ADP. Now, I will caution you. Here's what happens a lot with mock drafts. People will join. They'll select a player or two, and then they will leave their team on an auto draft. And auto draft, that algorithm still, for some reason, has yet to be figured out because auto draft sucks. If it's your real draft, do not depend on auto draft. So if you have an awesome team in your mock draft, great. Good for you. But don't take it with a grain of salt, because I've seen players like Tyreek Hill fall to like the 3rd round in some mock drafts. Like, just crazy stuff will happen. But for me in general, it's a good way of getting a good barometer of how the first round will shake up. Usually that's a very, very good, teller of, and the nice thing too, is you get to pick the league size you join. So if you're joining a 12-man league for real, you just joined a 12-man league in your mock. So you can adjust the situation. But real quick, I don't know, Emmer, if you ever saw this episode, but there's a great episode of the league where the asshole of the group, Ruxin, decides to do mock drafts because he has the first overall pick and he's playing out all these scenarios, except he wasn't paying attention and accidentally joined like 100 actual leagues. And so he kept getting these calls and everything. Yep. He was just getting like harassed. Make sure you're in the mock draft thing, because I've actually seen that happen where people are like, wait, this is a real league. And you're just like, oh, you poor bastard.
Yeah, the nice thing about mock drafts is that you can sort of test out strategies too. So it's like, if you're picking early, you can see what players are there. You can, go running back first, or you go wide receiver first, or quarterback first. And then the next time you do a mock draft, you could change it up and be like, okay, this is the roster I can end up if I start with the running back first. This is the roster I could start with if I start with a wide receiver first. That's a good thing about mock drafting. It sort of gives you that real practice as far as like, potentially what you'll see in your draft. And then the nice thing too, especially I see this with Sleeper, I think lots of the other fantasy platforms are doing this. you can mock draft with your league settings in the platform. So Sleeper does this where it's like you can mock draft with your league settings. So then all the scoring should be closer and like all the auto draft picks should be closer to your actual league settings. So that should even get you a better idea. And then you also don't have to worry about, randos in your league that like try to mess things up, because believe me, Ted, I've done a lot of mock drafts where people take like kickers first.
Yeah.
It just totally screws up everything. It's like people want to actually mock draft to test out strategies, and there's always a few jokers that like to mess things up for everybody else. But yeah, I can't stress enough, mock drafts are very helpful, especially if you've never been in a fantasy draft before or never been in a fantasy football league before. That is a very nice way to sort of see the process and see the user interface and all that stuff. It's very, very helpful stuff for sure.
And I will say this, because again, yeah, because there are some mock drafts where I'm like, okay, thank God that was actually fairly realistic. This is what my roster could actually look like, especially when it comes to auction. Because you're right. Sometimes I'll join an auction mock draft and someone will be like $195 off the bat. And you're like, all right, you just screwed up the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
If you guys do a mock draft and you don't know if you're like, okay, is this roster actually realistic, or is this, did I, get got? Is that 90s reference, by the way? You got?
Yeah.
Damn it. Anyway, send us over a screenshot of your mock draft and ask us just straight up like, hey, how realistic is this roster? Should I expect something to shake out like this? We can tell. And honestly, that is the easiest analysis we will get all preseason is, hey, just look at my roster for 5 seconds. Is this actually realistic? Because I'm telling you right now, if Mahomes and Kelsey are on that roster together, no. But if it's Mahomes and like Hawkinson, I could actually see that potentially shaking out. So if you're not entirely sure how realistic your mock is, send it on over. Our socials are right there below. Oh my God, that's what it feels like when you nail that. That's such a cool feeling. Send it on over. Instagram's probably your best option for a more immediate response, but either Amir or myself, or maybe even both, will take a look at it. We'd love to share our opinions, of your roster, and feel free to do that after your actual draft too. How screwed am I? I feel good about this. Should I? We will hold no punches back. Trust us.
All right, just a couple more terms that I want to get to here, and then we'll get further along with the episode. But Tad, what is stacking?
Stacking, is that when you stack your roster full of like receivers and running back, or like you basically like just stack up like one position?
That is one way, but I was thinking more in the terms of like stacking from the same team. So you brought up the example of like drafting Mahomes and Kelsey. It's probably unlikely that you can end up with that, but it's like the whole point of stacking is the strategy that you use is that if you know that an offense is going to score a lot of points, you want to stack, air quotes there, from the same team. So it's like you want to get the same quarterback, you want to get the same wide receivers, possibly the same tight end as well. So that's where it sort of benefits you. That's like, as long as they're all playing together and everybody's healthy, you should be able to get a lot of fantasy points in that sense as well. But it can also work against you, because when that team goes on a bye week, you lose all those guys for that bye week for that given week. So you have to make adjustments there. So stacking is something lots of fantasy managers like to do because they could possibly get a lot of points. But then there are some detriments in a sense where it's like if any of those guys get hurt or like all those guys go on a bye week, that's where you have to sort of adjust your game plan.
So it's funny. So the reason I did my version, and I call it my version now, is because I stack. I actually support stacking, but in a different way. Because exactly like what you said is like if you're stacking by team, not only like are you screwed for that bye week, and we'll get into bye weeks in a bit because that is like fantasy nightmare fuel sometimes. Yeah. But let's look even past the bye week. Your gamble could just go wrong because like the start of this time last year, everyone was said, oh yeah, you stack the Chiefs, you're going to win your league. And the Chiefs offense was, I won't say inept. That's not totally fair to them.
I think a better example, Ted, if you're stacking Jets players from last year.
Ooh, that's an even better one. Because you were very high on Breece Hall last year. And Breece Hall,
was.
No fault of his own. Neither one of us is blaming Breece Hall. But yeah, Garrett Wilson had a surprisingly decent season. But yeah, so if you're drafting Garrett Wilson in the first round, as he went in a lot of drafts, but that's the whole thing is like, I think stacking by team carries a lot of unnecessary risk. What I like to do is I'll draft Nick Chubb, right? And because I'm a big believer in him, he broke my top 24. And by the way, if you would like to see our fantasy football player rankings, check out our Instagram and our Twitter. We posted them all there already. He did not even break your top 24. So true. For me, the reason he broke my top 24 is if I draft Nick Chubb, I'm going to stack some running backs. I'm going to go running back heavy on my roster. So I think stacking by position is actually smart because if my gamble with Nick Chubb pays off, then great. I have Nick Chubb and then I have a bunch of trade bait And by the way, that's not one of the terms we were going to bring up, but trade bait, a really good player you don't really need that you can dangle from another team. The worst case scenario, my gamble with Nick Chubb doesn't work out, and now I have a bunch of options on my bench to help make up for it. So stacking at position, I'm in favor of. Stacking on team, too much of a risk.
Yep, I like that. What's the definition of streaming?
Streaming, you mean defenses?
Any position.
No, it's
because it can apply to anything.
Real. It applies mostly to defenses.
It does.
Streaming essentially means that, and kickers too, I guess. You don't keep the same player week from week. You'll see this very often. Actually, oh God, poor Jets. I'm so sorry I'm beating up on you guys this episode. Aaron Rodgers goes down after 4 snaps. You had no backup quarterback. You're going to be streaming quarterbacks for the rest of the season, likely. Meaning you pick up a guy based off the matchup that week. So let's say, I don't know, Kirk Cousins, for some reason last year wasn't drafted in your league. He feels like one of those guys on the edge of always being drafted or not. And he was playing the Atlanta Falcons, ironically. That would be a good pickup for that week. But then the very next week, he plays who was really good defense last year. You're 49ers. I'm not playing Kirk Cousins against the 49ers. So you drop Kirk Cousins, you look for the next best matchup that following week. Essentially, you keep adding a player and dropping him at the same position. And the reason we say defenses is because defenses are largely matchup based. If I have this upcoming year, if I have a defense playing the Raiders, they're at the top of my waiver wire list, and we'll get to that in a bit. But if that defense is then playing the Chiefs the next week, I'm dropping them immediately. Chargers, I'm talking about you. So it's that kind of streaming. Essentially just means you're just going week by week by week at a certain position.
I like it. So those are some of the terms that you may come across, especially when you listen to podcasts, reading articles, what have you. There may be some other terms that you may come across. You'd be like, I don't know what this is. Usually they should explain it a little bit. In case you have any more further questions, Tad already brought it up, but like interact with us. We're here to help you get into this hobby that has grown in such popularity. That's like, we want you to participate. We want you to have some fun and not be confused as you're going into it. So Tad, now that you're actually in your draft and you're doing it, like, I mean, what are some common things that you probably want to highlight for people out there when you're actually in the draft?
I will say this because this segment's gonna be a little tough, I think, for both of us because you and I have very different draft strategies, and I don't want
to go too much into strategy because that's what the rest of our podcast for. This is just very beginner stuff.
Hold on, would you let me finish? My goodness, you interrupt me more than my cat before dinner.
Pot calling kettle black.
True. I will say this in terms of general advice. While doing research for draft strategies, you will see a bunch of headlines like, this is the right strategy. This strategy will get you to win. There is no cookie cutter draft strategy. There's no single approach. It entirely depends on how your league is set up and also how you plan on playing it. I've seen players in leagues that are clearly favoring running backs pretty much ignore the running backs and just go because they know everyone's going for the running backs. They zig when everyone else is zagging, and they go for receivers and quarterbacks. And I've seen them win the league. So largely when it comes to drafts, kind of strategies, I would say pick a favorite, create like a top 3. And I'm not going to say top 3 receivers and top 3 tight ends, just regardless of position, pick top 3 players you want around every round. So top 3 guys for the first round, top 3 guys in the second round, and then create 1 or 2 backups for each one of those guys at the same position. So you want Nick Chubb, you're sitting at 6 in the first round. You want Nick Chubb is gone by there. Have 2 running backs that you're like, okay, I can settle for this guy. Basically, have a plan, but also have 2 backup plans because drafts get wild sometimes and a lot of crazy shit can happen. And when you panic, that's when you make really stupid moves, including, by the way, the most common mistake I see is have their bye weeks next to their name. Because I've seen that happen a lot where people draft pretty well, but then they'll take 1 or 2 crucial losses because they didn't plan for the bye weeks. And all of a sudden their playoff seeding is affected. And I know this sounds like, oh, it's playoff seeding. I made the playoffs. Playoff seeding matters.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're not going to go deep into strategy here. Like, the whole purpose is just to get you into fantasy football here. But I mean, tune into the rest of our episodes because we go deep into strategy. We go deep into some of our favorite players and all that stuff. So yeah, please tune into the rest of our episodes and some of our past episodes as well, both on YouTube and the podcast, to sort of get full, like, immersed as far as like guys that you want to be aware of and strategies you can employ. So now the draft is over, you have your roster, you're all set. What are the things that you could do now before you wait for the week 1 matchups to happen? Well, the nice thing about fantasy football is that you come up with, these fun names for your team roster. Obviously, you can also create a custom avatar. So it's like you could choose from a predetermined list of, logos and helmets and things along those lines. So you could do that based on the platform that you're using. Or yeah, you could sort of upload your own image and then use that as your avatar as well. I mean, Tad, usually the most common ones for fantasy team names are usually it's a pun on a type of player out there. So I mean, Tad, I think you've done some clever ones in the past, and I got some examples here that I could share as well. But what are some of the ones you've done in the past?
Oh God, I'm trying to remember. Well, okay, so this is a pun, but not on anyone's name. Is I'm famous for trading a lot in every league I join.
We'll get into trading a little bit later
yes,
today's episode today.
You're gonna have to rein me in on that segment. So my team name for the last 2 years has been Trader Joe's.
Very
yeah, and I really enjoyed that one. I thought that one was pretty good. This one was funny because it was my first year as commissioner. I actually ended up winning my league, and so everyone was very upset and calling like election fraud basically. And so my name after that year was the People's Champion, like a dictator.
Nice.
They didn't find that as funny as I did.
Of course not.
Oh God, I'm trying to think of like some of the ones I had when I was a kid, but I'm blanking on it. But so I grew up in St. Louis, of course, when the Rams were still rightfully there. So wow, this really hasn't aged well. But Steven Jackson was one of my favorite players growing up. So Jackson 5 was one of the Jackson 5. So there are a lot of good puns, but basically the thing is it's your team name is the dad joke of your league.
Yeah.
Of just like go for a joke where people are like, that is terrible.
Yeah.
But it's still good.
That's part of the fun. I remember one from a couple of years ago. You did Thou Chenault Pass for Chenault. So that was a good one.
Yeah, you and Chauncey are making fun of me because I still can't say his name right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, some of the ones that I've used in the past, or some good ones that you can have here. So Dobbins for Apples, based on J.K. Dobbins.
Actually, don't
play on Bobbing for Apples there. So there's that one. On Stroud 9 for C.J. Stroud on Cloud 9. So you got that one there. Bijan Mustard for Bijan Robinson. Same thing there as a player.
A little on the nose, but don't hate it.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of like variations of that one. Gin and Juice. I did this one when Ted Ginn Jr.
That one's been around forever. Yeah.
When Ted Ginn Jr. was on the Niners specifically, I used that one for a while. So that was one of mine. Elway or the Highway, play on my way or the highway. I think that's a good one. You could go classic, you go current. I know a lot of people like to base their team name based on who they drafted. You could come up with the team name before that too. So I mean, it's really up to you.
That's true. So a great example, it's not football, but a great example of, kind of based off, team you drafted was the timing was fantastic. Was last year. So Amr and I share a fantasy baseball team. And we had Will Smith, the Los Angeles Dodgers catcher. And I forgot even what our team name was before that. And then in February of that season, the Will Smith slap happened where he slapped Chris Rock, excuse me.
Rock, yeah.
So we changed our team name to Will Smith Slap.
Yeah.
Like no pun, good. No joke. Just we got to do name Will Smith. We got to make a reference to it.
Yeah. So some things could be topical too. Like I know a lot of the common names that, based on the whole trend of the Hawk Tua girl, I think that's probably going to be a common one. You'll see it this year.
That's going to be a thing.
Because of TJ Hawkinson and then Tua Tagovailoa.
Yeah, I was about to say Hawk Tua Tagovailoa is going to be a thing.
Yeah, for sure. So you'll see a lot of that. So once you set your team name and you set your custom avatar, whatever it is, the only other thing that you really need to do is now you have to be ready for week 1. So in case you drafted a player that is hurt and you have a injured reserve spot or injured list spot for your roster, now you want to move that injured player to that spot. So for instance, we brought up Nick Chubb already on this episode. He is going to start the season on the IR. So in case you draft him, you can move him to your IR and you can now add a player to your roster to then take the spot for your injured player. All the other thing that you need to make sure of is just set the best matchups for your roster, because we talked about this in our last episode. You have a starting roster, then you also have your bench roster. So only the guys in your starting roster will score points for you. So you want to make sure that you have the right matchups in your starting roster, and you're not leaving guys potentially at the bench that can score a lot of points for you, but they won't actually add to your actual total once you actually get to your week 1 matchup.
And I will say this, and this really goes for really any site. You can take it into account, but do not base your decision solely off projected points. I see people that do that. And while, yes, these sites are good, largely they use some sort of AI to calculate those. Those are not like expert picks. And the AI, and that's basically the whole reason why Amar and I do our Stardom Situm episode throughout the season, is because it's very easy to see, well, this person's projected for 7.1 points, but really they're set up for like 14 points. The AI makes mistakes. The algorithm is far from perfect. I'm sure one day it will be, but for now, there are easy ways to exploit that. So don't, if you're a rookie and you're like, I don't, and trust me, I get it. You're working during the week. You don't really have time to do research or anything. First off, we're a great resource, but also there are other great resources out there. Just Google Stardom Situm. But I'm telling you, do not base your decisions solely off the projected points, because a lot of times throughout the season, they can be way, way off.
Yeah. It can be
Especially for tight
helpful to a
ends.
certain extent, but do not
Yes.
depend all your basis for your starts and sits based on that projected point total. I can't agree with that more.
Especially tight ends, because that position is largely, touchdown dependent. And so what the AI will do is there will be a, backup tight end. 3 years ago, this happened with the Chargers, where back-to-back weeks they had different backup tight ends lighted up. And then AI is like, they must be able to get like 12 points the next week. And you and I both were like, don't fall for the trap.
Exactly. So that's pretty much what you want to do as you get ready for week 1. But okay, now we're actually in the season. We're a couple weeks in, Tad. Like, what are the things that a novice fantasy football player, some newbie here, like, what are the things they need to be aware of once we actually get into the season?
Oh, God, that's a good question. So we're talking like 4 or 5 weeks in?
It could even just be a couple weeks, but just what are the things they need to be monitoring week to week now?
After the first week. So here, do we want to get a waiver wire, or are we going to wait on that?
Yeah, this is a good point to bring up waiver wire for sure.
So for those of you who don't know, the waiver wire is essentially this. It's a pool of players, and we broke this down in our last episode, so I'll go through it quickly. It's a pool of players who did not get drafted. And then it opens up on Monday to put in your claim. And this is most leagues. Your days may be a little different depending on your league, but most leagues function like this. On Monday, you get to put in your claim. So let's say there's I have Aaron Rodgers. He goes down. How about this? If Bryce Young does really well week 1, all of a sudden you're like, I want Bryce Young to be his replacement. You put in a claim for Bryce Young. A claim is not pickup. The difference is if you went 0-1, and there are a whole bunch of factors, but basically it's ordered from 1 to however many people are in your league, 1 to 10, 1 to 12, whatever. First person with the first claim, whoever they want the most, they will get. Let's say I'm number 12 and I put in a claim for Bryce Young. Since number 1 got him, he'll be gone by the time he gets to me. So on Wednesday, the waiver wire will process. You wake up Wednesday. I hate waking up Wednesday mornings during the season. It's the worst. You look to see who you got, who you didn't get. You adjust based off that. So I would say a couple weeks in, keep an eye on the waiver wire, because week 1's wild. You're going to have a couple random players who are going to score really well. And you just got to hope you bet on the right one, because some will not score that like that again. Others will be like the surprise player of the year, just the way fantasy football works. But the interesting thing is, keep track of the guys who are doing consistently well throughout the first 3 or 4 weeks. That's the guy that you can count on. Also, start looking at your bench and start considering making some tough cuts. I really like this guy during the draft. If he's only averaging 5 points, this happens all the time with me and receivers, where I'm like, I thought this receiver was going to do really well, but he's just not being targeted. This coordinator is stupid. And you want it to work out so well. Do not develop emotional attachments to your drafted players. Get ready to cut some guys. Keep an eye on the waiver wire. Also, we'll touch on this in a little bit, but as the big trade guy, keep an eye on other players' teams. Who's getting absolutely massacred by injuries? Who has a really good roster that's underperforming and they may be panicking? Because that's another area of opportunity for you.
Yeah, I think the big thing is for sure when you're looking at your waiver wire and you're looking at your roster every single week, after the first couple of weeks, that's also when bye weeks are happening. If you're not familiar with what a bye week is, that's where a team gets a scheduled week off. So they get time to rest and obviously recuperate, add some extra, practices, whatever it is, to get ready for the rest of the season. And when that happens, your player will not play that week and they will not score any points for you. So that is something to monitor for your roster as well. So it's you'll see a little number next to your player. You use very tiny print. It'll say WK dot, and it'll have a number there. It'll say 8. It'll say 9. It'll say 12, whatever it is. That is when your player's bye week is. So that is something to keep aware of too, because that is something you need then go to the waiver wire. So it's when your player's on a bye week, that's where you then need to replace them on your roster, either from the bench, or even if you don't have guys on your bench that can fill that spot for a given bye week, that's where you then have to go to the waiver wire to pick up a guy to then fill your replacement for that bye week.
And real quick, Pot, jumping in here, oh, come on. That was a great joke. That was a great callback.
It was,
I
but
hate you.
it's exactly what you
Um,
are, though. So
yeah,
it's like
exactly.
it's not even
But
a joke. It's
but
exactly what
just
you
no,
are.
because something you said reminded me of this, and I don't think we brought this up yet. But if you have a player that goes down with a fairly severe injury, first off, don't drop them right. Well, you're not allowed to drop them on Sunday. You're not allowed to make any roster moves after noon on Sunday or whenever kickoff is in your time zone. Um, but don't drop them like on Monday or Tuesday. Wait until that news comes out because IR rules in the NFL have changed the last few years where IR does not mean you're done for the season. You could come back. And so you may be asking yourself, what's the point of an IR spot? If you don't want to drop, if you have a player in a bye week and you don't want to drop anyone and you have an injured player, you can move them to the IR spot and that opens up a spot on your roster. So you can put in a claim for a player on waivers without having to drop anyone. Now, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because eventually when that player gets healthy again, then you'll have to drop someone. But hopefully by then you get your roster a little bit more figured out.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that games are almost any time of the week now. You got your
Oh
standards, you
God,
got your
that's true.
Thursday
Yeah.
night, you got your Sunday night, and you got your Monday night. But yeah, as we get towards the end of the season, as we get closer to the end of the regular season, I should say specifically, we may have games on Saturdays. We may have games on Friday. Actually, the first game of the season, we have the Packers and the Eagles are playing on Friday night in Brazil. So you need to make sure that your roster is set for that Friday night game as well. So it's like guys that, make sure that you're aware of when games are starting because once a game starts, you cannot adjust your roster for that said player. They are locked. So if they're on your bench, you can't move them into your starting roster in case they have a great game. So it's like, be aware of that. I can't stress enough, just like Tad says, like, don't be aware of just your roster. Look at the performance of everybody else's rosters too, because I think this is a good point to sort of get into trades here, Tad, is that you can add to your roster not just through the waiver wire, but through trades as well, just like in a normal NFL season. It's like to improve your roster, you have to give up a certain amount of capital in order to acquire a certain amount of capital. And then depending on the league that you're in, if you're in a dynasty league, you can also trade draft picks as well. But for our standard redraft leagues, you can only trade players. So Tad, obviously you're the trade aficionado. Why don't you go into some trades and some possible trade strategies?
Okay, we're at 36 minutes. I'm going to cut myself off at 38. So basically, in general, I'm going to try my best. In general, with trades, as with trades in real life and business and anything else in life, is yes, you're going to have to give up something. And this is why I like stacking positions, because if you go a little receiver heavy or running back heavy or what say you on your bench, eventually it's just pure mathematical reality. A team is going to be receiver needy or running back needy or quarterback needy. Quarterback needy, those are the teams to really go after. Those are the guys to really go after because quarterback is, I know running backs have this title for a lot of people. To me, quarterback's the most important position in fantasy football. So my general strategy is don't start off with a bad trade. Don't try to, there's a less PC name that we'll avoid, but don't try to just trade stomp them right off the bat because it's an insult. What I found is largely negotiations when I'm there because it's just like, well, F you, you're not taking this serious. So definitely start off with something a little bit more lean toward your, favoring you. If they accept it, great. You just benefit it. If not, then start negotiations. Don't be afraid to text the person. If you have their number, start doing it. Be friendly with them. Don't play hardball. Just like kind of be like, hey, what do you need? Be friendly with them. Hey, and also psych them out. Psych them out. Well, Derrick Henry with the Ravens just got hurt. J.K. Dobbins I don't even know if he's his backup. J.K. Dobbins, he's not. Who's his backup?
Keaton Mitchell.
Oh, wow. The undrafted rookie. Okay. Wow. Good for him. So yeah, hey, Keaton Mitchell, because he actually did look good last season. He looked really good. Maybe Derrick Henry's workload starts getting kind of eaten into. I don't know if he's as valuable anymore. Make them think their assets are less valuable than yours. And I mean, if you have any trade advice, I would love to walk you through it because trades are my main thing in fantasy football. It's the main reason why I love this hobby. It's absolutely fantastic.
But yeah, so you can make trades, and even if your person that you're trying to trade with, if they don't like the trade, you can send counters.
Yes.
You can add messages, so it's to be like, okay, if you're not interested in this running back, I can add this guy. And so it's like all this can get handled virtually. I like to handle things like through personally, so it's like I like to text people, be like, hey, I sent you a trade offer. What do you think? Let's work this out instead of just doing everything virtually through the platform there. But it's like, yeah, that's a nice way to sort of improve your roster in case because depending on the roster side, the league size that you're in, like I mentioned, if you're in a 12-person league, league, your waiver wire pool is going to be that much harder to find a quality player compared to a 10-person league or less than that. So it's like you kind of forced to, if you run into a situation like last year where it's like you had Aaron Rodgers on your roster and he got hurt the very first week of the season, if you want to get a better quarterback, you kind of have to find it through a trade opportunity because your waiver wire options were probably very thin. So it's like, yeah, you need to work with the other guy, try and make it as even as you can. Because at the end of the day, it's like you want to benefit both parties. Like, I mean, obviously you'd like for it to benefit you only, but that's the only way that you possibly make it something to go through, is that it benefits both parties.
Also fair. But yes, no, so two things you actually made me think of. Last two things I'll bring up is one, if someone tries to do what I said don't do, where they'll send you a horrific trade, and you obviously your initial instinct is just, like go away and just decline it. Don't decline it. I hate when people do that. Decline and counter is an option in almost every single one of these websites. Decline and counter gives the other person an idea of a more realistic landing spot. Because if you just decline, it's like dropping a fish in their lap, and they're just, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, what do you want? Like, tell me what you want then. And so decline and counter, give them an idea that will help negotiations kind of move forward. Also, very important thing, kind of going back to the bye weeks a little bit. Make sure you look at, if I accept this, and again, most of these sites will tell you, if I accept this trade, when will it process? Because some of those guys, if they play on Thursday night, when they get traded over to you, will transfer over to you. So if you know that's a good Thursday matchup, go for it. But if it's a player who's playing on Thursday night and it's a bad matchup and you think he's going to suck, hold off on that trade, execute it either that Thursday or that Friday. It will process that next week. So make sure you are paying attention to when that trade will eventually go through, because normally once a trade is accepted, it's not instantaneous. I've seen some leagues where it is, where, the commissioner will go in and just make the trade happen. Most leagues, they give them 2 or 3 days, let the league vote on it. Leagues can veto a trade. So just make sure you're paying attention. When does that trade actually go through?
Yeah, that's actually a great point, Ted, that you brought up. I was about to bring that point up too. That's like, look at your trade settings, because in some leagues they have no veto power. Whatever the trade is, even if one guy got absolutely one-sided compared to the other guy, it's like, it doesn't matter. The trade is going to go through. Lots of leagues that I like to run, especially as commissioner, it's like, I like to just make sure that everybody's okay with the trade. So I personally go and I ask everybody this, like, okay, is this trade okay? Because then I could process the trade that much faster. Otherwise, standard processing for a trade usually takes like about 48 to 72 hours if nobody votes on it at all. So yeah, make sure you look at your trade settings too. In case you need a player faster, then it's like, you can message your commissioner and be like, hey, can you ask people to vote so then we can process this trade faster so I can have my guy buy that Thursday night game or whatever it is. So,
and in large part, I mean, we talked about this, but I don't know about you, but I've been doing fantasy football for almost 2 decades now, which makes me feel very old.
Believe me, I'm in the same boat.
I've only really seen maybe 2 or 3 trades truly vetoed. I've seen plenty of trades fall through at the last minute where someone chickens out. That's different.
Yes.
But in terms of the league stepping up and being like, this cannot happen, I've really only seen that, I think, twice in my life. It's not that common.
Yeah, I think for the most part, people are very accepting. They're just like, it's not a big deal. But yeah, if you get a lot of people that feel strongly about it, then a trade can get rejected by your league. Just a few more things I want to speak about the waiver system. Depending on the waiver settings for your league, this could be different too. You can have no waivers. Tad, I remember when I first started in fantasy football, I did no waivers. So literally it's like, if you were willing to stay up until all the players unlock after the games are over on Monday night, it's like you could stay up until like 2 a.m. and you could add a bunch of people to your roster. It's just like, there was no waiver wire whatsoever. So
it was the Wild West of fantasy football.
It was very much so that's an added strategy. That's just like, if it's a Wild West situation, if you're willing to stay up or wake up at that time to get a bunch of players on your roster, that's like, you could do that. Now
I would get fired so quickly if that was still a thing.
Standard thing now is a rolling waiver thing, as far as like, how the order claim. So Tad was talking about like your order claim or the claim order for a waiver pool. So that usually works that after a week is done, you get ranked as far as like what your roster, your league record is. And so it's like, if you have a worse record, you usually get first priority to then go on the waiver wire to make your claims to potentially make your roster better to compete with everybody else. That's usually the way it works. Once you process a claim, then usually you get pushed down to the end as well. So regardless of whether your record is too. So different waiver settings work different ways. So make sure you check that out when you're looking at your league and scoring settings. Waiver settings is also very important to help you improve your roster through the waiver wire.
And most leagues work this way as well. If you're 1 and 2, let's say you're going into week 4 and you're 1 and 2 and you look and you're like number 6 and number 3 claim is also 1 and 2, and you're like, what the hell? Like, why does he get number 3? I get number 6. What's going on? Usually, not always, usually it's by points scored. So that
Yes.
means that you scored more points than he did. His team is doing, technically worse. Like he's getting blown out. You're losing all these close ones. That's where fantasy football gets brutal, man.
Yeah.
So you're just like,
Yeah.
wait, I'm losing a
Crazy.
bunch of 1-point games, which is more heartbreaking than getting
Yeah.
blown out. So unfortunately, if you're wondering why the same dude or woman with the same record is higher than you, most of the time it's they scored less points than you.
Yeah. And the last thing about waiver wire that I want to bring up is something called the watch list, or your, keep an eye on list. So this is something that you could do on the waiver wire. So Tad was talking about, like, don't just spring and pick up a guy off the waiver wire that had a fantastic last week, but there's not a guarantee that they may have a good week the following weeks or the rest of the season. So this is where, like, depending on the platform that you in, there's usually like a little flag icon, or there's like a little button that you can push that's like, add this person to your watch list. So now what happens is that in your waiver wire, once you go to that screen, there's this drop down that you can select who's guys on my watch list, and you can sort of track those guys that you have on your watch list as far as like, okay, they've been performing pretty consistently. Now I think is what I want to actually add them to my roster and take them off my waiver wire list. Now, some people like Tad, they have their watch list all internally, so they don't like to use that function. But some people, especially if you're new, especially if you're new to fantasy football leagues, that maybe is something that can help you sort of separate guys. That's like, okay, these are guys I want to keep on track on for the next couple of weeks to see how they're performing in this score. Instead of looking through every single player at a position or the entire waiver wire pool, this is a nice way to just sort of finite that, segment it. So it's like, these are the guys that I want to keep an eye on. So,
and you won't really need it as the season goes on because the waiver wire gets, skinnier and skinnier as the season goes on. But like weeks 1, 2, and 3, that is a very, very helpful tool for sure.
Exactly. So, all right, Tad. So we're coming close to the end of the fantasy regular season, and now we're getting close to the fantasy playoffs. Now, this is something that you also want to be checking when you're looking at your league settings and your league scoring settings, is that how many teams make the playoffs? Because you may be in a 12-person league and half the league will make the roster. So 6 of the 12 teams will make the playoffs. But you may play in a different league where it's like, okay, I'm playing in a 10-person league, but only 4 people will make the playoffs. So it's like, that really makes a difference. So it's like when you're fighting for the playoff spot towards the end of the season, and you're looking at the standings as far as like, oh, I'm in 6th place, I'm safe. But it's like, if you look at the playoff setting, it's like, it's only the top 4 that make the playoffs. That's like, okay, now I need to fight harder, or it's like, okay, unfortunately my season is done. So make sure you're paying attention to that, because that will affect your trade strategy, which we already brought up. That will affect your, the way you attack the waiver wire. It will affect just, matchups in general, as far as like, I really need to get this win in order to possibly get a shot at the playoffs. Like, that's a very important thing for sure. So make sure you check your playoff settings as far as the number of teams that make the playoffs. And then also, playoffs work differently. So some of them are a round robin style. So you get 2 eliminations and then you're officially out of the playoffs. Some are just single elimination. So if you lose 1, you're out. I remember this happened to me, and I think you as well, Tad, 2 years ago, where it's like, we had the best roster, best record heading into the playoffs.
It was set up for a Desai title game. A Desai title game.
We're both top seeds in the playoffs, but then unfortunately, just the way the chips landed, we both lost within that first round matchup, because it was a single elimination playoff tree that way. So it's like, yeah, make sure you check those settings out as well. But usually what happens with the fantasy playoffs is usually that's during week 16 through 17. Sometimes people start it earlier, so that's another thing to keep an eye on. When did the playoffs start? Because sometimes it can start week 14. Some people start it as late as like week 17, as mentioned. Some people don't even have a playoffs. I play in a league where it's a total point score all season long. Doesn't matter. There's no playoffs. So it's a rotisserie style. That's what they call it, where it's just like everybody competes against everybody. Just a total point total. That's who ends up winning the league. And so, yeah, make sure you check those settings out as well. And then, yeah, fantasy playoffs work the same way as the fantasy regular season, except as mentioned, it's just, if you're out in a single elimination, you are out. Your season is done. Double elimination, you may get a chance where you can move on, possibly, and get a win, and then possibly lose, and then still come back and win your fantasy title, sort of thing there. But Tad, am I missing anything there about fantasy playoffs specifically?
Just the one thing I would say is just pay attention to your player's status, not in terms of injury, but that as well. But if you have the Philadelphia Eagles and they're running away with the NFC East, there's a very good chance that, especially because he's a more mobile quarterback, they say screw it and sit Jalen Hurts for the last 3 weeks and then play Kenny Pickett just to make sure that Jalen Hurts is ready for the playoffs. So make sure you are not shocked when you start Jalen Hurts and he has 0 points for you, and that's how you get out on the playoffs. I haven't seen that in years because I'm obviously a more experienced league, but I have to imagine more rookie leagues, that is a very common thing. Make sure that coaches are not resting their starters.
That's a big one.
And largely coaches will stay very non-committal on it. And so you are monitor it like you would an injury. Because usually coaches will announce it like Friday, Saturday. Very rarely do they announce like day of, like, oh, we're not playing starters. But it will be very late in the week to try to throw off the other team. So by like Friday or Saturday, I'd be checking the status of your like best players very, very closely.
That's a very good point. You may get some teams that, they have their playoff seeding already secure in the NFL playoffs. So it's like, they may decide to rest their starters, or they only may play like one quarter and then
they do that too.
That's a trap you may fall into as well. But just like Tad said, keep an eye on that as far as what's the status is for players that are on potential NFL playoff teams as opposed to like your fantasy playoff team. So very good thing to keep in mind of. So, all right, Tad. So now the fantasy playoffs as well is over. So pretty much the fantasy season is done. Depending on the league that you're in, you could have a fantasy punishment for the team that comes in dead last. There's definitely fantasy, rewards as far as like, depending on the league you could have a buy-in of like, $20 and then the winner takes all, or it's like, the winner gets majority of the money and then the second place person gets their buy-in, or it could get split, depend on different ways. That's where you talk to your commissioner as far as like how the fantasy rewards are separated. A lot of leagues do obviously a fantasy trophy. I've seen like fantasy championship belts. That's a bigger thing now. Fantasy rings have grown in popularity as well. So depending on the league, you may get some sort of reward or bauble based on like, what it is that, you potentially may win. But I'll pass it over to you here, Ted, to discuss fantasy punishments, because I know in your league you do it. I'm not a huge fan of, punishing people. I'm more like rewarding success than punishing failure. So I usually am not a big fan of fantasy punishments, but I know your league is big on it. So you can share some of the ones you've done.
I was about to say the fantasy season is never done, because then in the off season, it's a month-long debate of what will the punishment be. We have run through so many punishments, including some politically leaning stuff that we ultimately determined not to do because I could end up being dangerous. I told him that the capital would be safe, but but no. So we've had guys go to like minor league sport games by themselves, and they've had to stay for the entire game, and they've had to take like a video of like the start of the game, the end of the game, to prove they never left. They did just go and leave. Our loser last year had to run the Hot Ones gauntlet. That wing show. So he bought all the sauces on the show and ran through, and he's in California while the rest of us are in Texas. So we have two members in California. So they both met up, and the other one was Deshaun Evans and was interviewing him while they were going through the gauntlet. Like, what was your worst mistake? What move was your best move? What was your worst draft pick? It was hilarious. Of course I lost. God, what was that? I was in grad school at the time. So that had to be almost 3 or 4 years ago. 3 years ago. Yeah. Where I'm so mad because if you go, you copied off the guy who went viral. I did it before him.
It's true.
Like 48 hours before him, I did it. I did the thing where you go to Pancake House. For me, it was a Denny's. Stay there for 24 hours, but every pancake you eat or waffle you eat is 1 hour off your time. I ended up staying there for 12 hours. I must have drank, I'm not even exaggerating, at least 12 cups of coffee. 12 cups of coffee. I definitely had 12 pancakes because I was only there for 12 hours. Only 12 hours.
Yeah, only 12.
Only 12. I'm trying to think. The first one I got to experience in person actually was a loser 5 or 6 years ago. I had to wear a romper, one of those like one-piece rompers, and he's a guy, obviously. So we went out to a bunch of bars, and obviously we were much, much younger, so they were more like clubs. And this one actually kind of backfired on us. So he wore a romper out, and we're like, oh, this is so embarrassing for him. He owned it, and the girls loved it. And his his now wife, very not happy with us. Because he was the life of the party that night, and she's like, make him take it off. We're like, I don't think you want that right now.
Yeah. Nice. I've seen random stuff as far as like, there's a viral one going around of Luke Combs, I think it is, country singer. He plays in Fantasy League, and he was doing a concert, and what he did is he had all the losers come on stage and sing in front of a giant crowd.
That's
So
great.
that's a viral video that's
That's a
going
great
around right
one.
now. I remember when ESPN used to do like a fantasy football marathon. So they'd be on air for 24 hours and they share like, tips and tricks and they do lots of random stuff. They had a punishment that was done live. And this was like a drink, like a suicide drink essentially. So it's like
Oof.
different guys in the league put different stuff in a cup. There's like ketchup and hot sauce and soda and like weird stuff in there. And then the loser had to drink said drink and finish it all. So it's like, that's something that I've seen done before. I've seen a lot of people that they wear the sandwich board and they're like ringing a bell and it's like,
I've actually
I
seen
lost
that
my fantasy league. So that's a pretty common one I've seen as well. So it's like, there's lots of things you could do out there. So I mean,
I remember, God, this is gonna be a day reference, but I remember in college one time I was walking down the quad at TCU, and one guy was in a hot dog costume going, "Ask me about my wiener," and he had to do that for like 3 hours. And for those of you who don't know, go watch Accepted.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. So yeah, lots of punishments out there, lots of rewards as far as like I said, trophies and championship belts and rings and
Just how I give the
money
trophy
obviously
away.
is a good
That's
one.
what it's done.
There's I know I played in a league that's like whoever comes in first place gets like a nice NFL jersey, like a nice stitched one. So that's a very cool, possibility there. So yeah, that's really up to the discretion of your commissioner. You can vote on that as a league and figure out what the reward is or what the punishment is, vice versa, obviously. But yeah, that's usually a fun thing that happens after the league is over.
And I will say this, I was the past couple of years, especially as commissioner, I was very against getting a trophy, and eventually I was outvoted on that because against my better judgment, our league is democracy, so they voted to get a trophy, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. The prices actually aren't as bad as you think. You can get some pretty extravagant trophies at a pretty decent price, along with nameplates that you can personalize, and the site that we use. And no, I will not tell you the site on air because they are currently not a sponsor. So if that site would like to get a shout out on air, you know where to reach us. But if you would like a one-on-one conversation where, hey, I got my trophy from here, there are a lot of great sites out there that will just send the name tags anywhere over the country. I just sent it over to a good friend of the show, Chauncey Talise, a couple months ago because he is the reigning LAFB network champion and cost me maybe $6 to send it all the way over to California from Texas. So I know the idea of a trophy or ring or something, you're like, and nobody's got the money for that. Have you seen inflation? It's really not as bad as you think.
Yeah. It's very affordable. It's very affordable for sure. Besides that, I mean, depending on the league that you're in, if you're playing in a keeper league or if you're playing in a dynasty league, there's only a few things left that you have to worry about there. If you play in a keeper league, what pretty much that means is that most of your roster gets redrafted, but you can select potentially based on how your league settings are. You can choose one or two players to stay on your roster. And then instead of getting a draft pick in your next year's draft, you get to keep those players and they take the place of one of your draft picks. So that you set your keeper settings as far as which players you want to keep. And then if you're in a dynasty league, well, we explained this in our last episode, but this is pretty much now you're taking your roster year to year. And so now the incoming rookies, this is where you have your rookie draft once the NFL draft happens. And so you have your rookie draft happening usually in May or June. And that's when you draft your rookie draft players to add to your roster in that time. And so those are usually the only things that you have to worry about. So, I mean, that kind of covers everything, Ted. Like, I mean, we covered a lot in our first episode, getting into all the basic stuff. We got into all the draft stuff, waiver wire stuff in today's episode. But is there anything else you kind of want to leave the viewers and listeners out there as far as like, first time at it with fantasy football? This is something that, you want to pass on.
Don't be afraid to adapt. I think that's the biggest mistake I made in fantasy football is, yes, I was really pretty overwhelmed as well. And plus I came into fantasy football at a weird time when it was largely going online for the first time. And so everyone was kind of like, how do we do this? And the biggest mistake I made for really the first couple of years, I was like, I have a strategy. I'm going to stick to it for the entire year. That's a bad way of going about it. You've got, and that's why I like trading so much. People always ask me like, why do you enjoy trading so much? Is because for me, fantasy football is a week-to-week game. It is a season-long
game.
What
it is. That's exactly what it is.
But you got to do it week from week. And that is why I'm so into trades, is because you have got to be willing to be flexible, to adapt. And a lot of times you're going to get frustrated. Give it 24 hours. There are going to be Sundays where you're like, I hate fantasy football. Why do I do this to myself? This is ruining the sport for me. Go to bed. Unfortunately, go to work the next day. Calm down. And then on Monday night, sit down, compose yourself, and evaluate. So just be flexible, and also don't make any knee-jerk reactions. Knee-jerk reactions is how people, most of the time I've seen and I've seen this for myself too. I mean, I'm telling you this from experience. I made some very dumb knee-jerk reaction moves. What was the trade you guys were all? Oh, I traded Christian McCaffrey because Christian McCaffrey got hurt. I freaked out because my team wasn't doing very well, and I thought he was going to be out for the season. I traded him. He went on to be fantasy MVP because I freaked out. Was that last season?
That was last season.
Oh, good God. Yeah, see, that's how far off I put it from my memory. But point being is I do it as well. And so I'm telling you from experience, don't freak out, be flexible. And also, it's a largely case-by-case basis. That's why we try to cover this as generally as possible. But if you need help, those socials, oh my God, I did it twice in an episode. That's so cool. Those socials right below. Amr is much more level-headed than I am. I'm much more bullish than he is, but that's good. That's why we work out so well, is you get both sides. So hit us up throughout the season, after the season, during your draft. No guarantees we'll respond during your draft, but we'll try our best. So we're here to help you from this episode and beyond.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I want to stress is just have fun. Like, I mean, there's a lot of people that take it way too seriously.
I need to take that advice.
There's a lot of people that take it very seriously, which is fine. It's a very, addicting, very expensive, like not expensive hobby, but just a hobby that you can sort of get very deep into. It can get very deep in the weeds as far as like analysis, and it's like, the very famous adage, analysis paralysis. Like you sort of overstimulate simple, just too much decisions as far as what you can make there. But just like overall, it's just a fun way to enjoy a very popular sport out there, the NFL game out there. So it's like, just have fun out there. And the last thing is just a very big cliche in the fantasy sports world is that, I know Tad mentioned this before, but it's just like, your league is not won by the draft. Well, a very famous fantasy football cliche is that your fantasy, like the way the fantasy season will go is that it's 1/3 based on your draft, 1/3 based on how you play the waivers and the trade market, and then a third of it is luck. So it's like, you may end up with a situation where it's like you get hit on those first two, but if you have terrible luck where lots of your players get hurt, it's like you can't control that. So it's like Tad said, don't stress out, just enjoy it. It's going to be fun. Like, I mean, it's just a fun way to sort of enjoy football in a different way and then get some exposure to a lot of other teams that you may not have exposure of. Like, it's like you may be a diehard, Seahawks fan, but it's like now you may be rooting for like Niners or Rams players, or it's like finding out about Patriots players that you may never had any sort of interest in before. It's really just a fun way to sort of become more of a bigger football fan. But yeah, that's the biggest thing I say. Just have fun.
And kind of going off that is don't be that guy. And by that guy, I mean, if you're having a bad season, your matchup, and I'll tell you the worst, because if you get ravaged by injuries, that's a little easier to take because that's just pure luck. Yeah, exactly. For me, the worst type of bad season is when you have an actually pretty solid team, but your matchups are just terrible every week. And they're just like, I'm just making all the wrong moves. If that happens, you're out of the playoffs and you're going to finish last. Yes, it's not a fun position to be in. Don't be that guy that quits and doesn't set your lineup.
That's a big
one.
Never quit on your league, guys. Like,
don't
keep
quit
setting your lineups, do all that.
And I will say this too. It's very fun to be that upset guy where like, and I've seen this happen before where last place by like 5 games takes first seed out of the playoff running by a massive upset, like a random blowout. And then you make, first seed, trust me, way more upset than you ever were. So yeah, don't quit on your league, play it out till the end because you will get those random little upsets that you're like, you know what? This is actually pretty fun. So don't quit on your league no matter what. Because I promise, is ultimately you will look back on the season and be like, yeah, that was worth it.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. That's a very good point for sure. Yeah, guys, keep setting your rosters each and every week, even if you're dead last and you have no hope whatsoever. It's like, don't ruin it for everybody else in your league for sure. So, guys, that's sort of like our Fantasy Football 1. We dove into all sorts of topics here, like I said, from just getting into it to the draft to trades and all of that. But I mean, guys, this is just a very beginner look. Like, I mean, me and Tad do this all season long. So, I mean, we're going to get into, like, once the season begins, we're going to get into start sits and who are guys you need to pick up off the waiver wire and who are guys you need to make trades for and all of that. So, I mean, please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so it goes up to date with all of that as well. And yes, the biggest thing that I can't stress enough is that if you're a first timer, even if you're not a first timer, like interact with us on social media because that is the best way you can get a hold of us and ask us advice about trades, about how to draft, about strategies. I mean, just anything and everything. We'll give you personalized advice based on the specific league that you're in. You got me at UpTheSide23. You got Tad at TadDesai94. You got the show handle at the Desai Guys, and of course on Instagram at the Desai Guys as well. So don't be afraid to DM us, interact with us. We're here to help you win your respective fantasy football leagues and championships. And yeah, really just get you into a very, like I said, growing popularity as far as a hobby is concerned. And just, fun way to sort of have fun with your friends, your colleagues, your family, whatever it is. Just, it's a really fun thing that you can be doing out there. And guys, please, if you're giving us support our parent network at LAFB Network, because they're giving a lot of great content when it comes to the Rams and the Chargers, when it comes to the professional level, and the Bruins and the Trojans when it comes to the college football level as well. Lots of great content coming from them. But guys, to everybody who's already interacting with us, who's listening to the podcast, who's watching the videos, I mean, just anything and everything that you're doing to support the podcast, we can't thank you enough.
And hey, if we didn't convince you fantasy football is quite your thing, our bad. But guess what? That's not just our one thing either. We have a little bit of college football material coming out over the next couple of weeks. We are definitely going to go a little bit more draft heavy as the winter and of course the spring roll around. So be sure to keep checking in with us if you're more of a draft guy, an actual draft guy. We have that coming up. And also don't forget, our betting segments are just weeks away from starting up again. We actually have a very good, if we combine both of our records, we actually are very good bettors.
We are.
Yeah, no, we're pretty good. So be sure to check in for, betting material as well. And if you're like, none of that is for me, that's fine. Then maybe the two of us aren't for you. But like Amir said, we're not the only two people at LAFB Network. They have a great team around there. So be sure to check them out at LAFBnetwork.com. If you just want to see the headlines and maybe you're one of those people who likes seeing the headlines and just arguing with people, we like that too. That's why we got a Reddit page. So hit us up on the Reddit page. You can interact with all the writers, all the other podcasters we have there. We're all part of that page. We all check it fairly regularly. I always have a problem with that word. So, I promise you, if you're looking for football content, LAFB Network is the place to be. And if you're looking for fantasy content, the Desai Guys Football Forum is the place to be. We're getting ready to ramp up. The first week of August is officially gone.
It is.
Wow.
It is come and gone.
This season's going to be here before we know it. There were two preseason games tonight, by the way.
There were.
So, yes, the football season will be here before we know it. And you guys know we'll always be here to cover it and help you guys out. So, as always, everyone, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And please stay safe.